What is time? Is it seconds, minutes, hours? Is it days, months, years? Sure, those are measurements we humans have slapped onto time to make sense of it, all based on the Earth spinning around like a cosmic top and looping around the sun. But guess what? Those measurements would be totally meaningless if you were on another planet. Imagine an alien showing up and assuming you could conversate. You begin trying to make awkward small talk and try to explain what an amazingly fun weekend you had, but that your hangover going back to work was making your Monday morning even worse. The alien probably would not understand what a weekend was, nor a Monday morning, and why it was so bad to begin with. He also wouldn't understand what a hangover was, but that's Duolingo's future problem. We might very well soon finally see the first humans step foot on Mars. Now on Mars, time would have its own funky rhythm. A Martian day, or sol, is just a tad longer than an Earth day, at 24 hours and 39 minutes. Hey, that's kind of like hitting your snooze button on your alarm, which I utilize way too much, but I digress. A Martian year is a whole different beast. 687 Earth days that it takes to complete one orbit around the sun. So whatever your age is now, cut it in half and you'd be a Martian teenager. Just don't try to use that to get out of paying bills. So time is relative to where you are, but it's also tied to space, like a cosmic buddy system. In fact, Einstein showed how space-time is actually an additional dimension, the fourth dimension. To understand this fourth dimension of space-time, then we need to understand exactly what a dimension is. Now we live in a three-dimensional world. We can go forward and back, left to right, and we can go up and down. Pretty easy, right? But to illustrate this dimensional barrier, imagine a world where everything is flat, no up or down. Welcome to Flatland.
Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in a flatland. A land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us flatlanders, about left, right, and we know about forward, back, but we have never heard of up, down. Let us imagine that into flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. "Hello," says the three-dimensional creature. "How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension." Well, the poor square looks around his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter Flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in Flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches Flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by Flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above Flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in Flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing Flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before, to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply.
Likewise, we three-dimensional folks could have a fourth-dimensional being hanging out, moving through space and time, and we wouldn't have a clue. They could show up at any point in the universe, drop in on any moment in history, or pop into the future. Your motion through space affects time's flow, making it run faster or slower, depending on how you're moving compared to the rest of the universe. Space and time aren't just best friends, they're actually one and the same thing. Space-time.
Let's begin by visualizing a standard 3D space. But because we want to eventually see all of space and time in one model, let's cheat a little. Let's compress all of 3D reality as we know it into a flat, two-dimensional place. In this plane, let's make that our XY plane, which we will label space, which frees up the Z dimension for time. In this model, all 3D people are now just 2D. A 2D person could exist and live their lives in the place marked space at the bottom of our chart. However, by moving them up on the chart at a constant rate, they are also moving through time. Let's for ease and convenience say that the top of our diagram is the future, while the bottom is the past. So the higher up our 2D person goes in this diagram, the older they get. As we don't seem to have a whole lot of control over our ability to travel through time, let's imagine for a second that our 2D person travels upwards at a constant rate, as if there is some consistent force or wind at play pushing them upwards towards the future. Sadly, we cannot slow down time for ourselves simply through willpower, no matter how much we might want to do so. However, it is misleading to say that we can't change it at all. The faster we travel in space, the slower we travel in time. This is one of the guiding principles of Einstein's relativity. This model can express this idea through the power of vectors. As our 2D person tries to move to their left or to their right, their vector of travel changes. While traveling at a fixed rate, like a sail on a ship catching a breeze, we can only go as fast as the wind takes us, so the vector coming out from their front must always remain the same. To travel the fastest through time, our 2D person must orient his vector completely in the future direction or upwards. However, if they are to travel any amount in either direction to their sides, they can only do so by pointing their vector away from their direction of travel. They have motion in the X direction now, but they have done so by reducing their motion in the Z direction. They are moving through space, but at the cost of moving a little slower through time. Taking this to its furthest extreme, our individual has completely flipped on their side and now only has motion in the direction of X and none in the direction of Z. They have velocity in space, but not time. So I suppose this implies our vector is the speed of causality, or the speed of light. If this is the speed we're talking about, then moving at low speeds through space would not have any noticeable difference in our speed through time. We'd have to go really fast before we started to notice anything. The vector still mostly points upwards. An interesting result of this model is that, from the 2D man's perspective, nothing has really changed. He has his own view of what reality is. For him, the vector coming out of his chest is still time. The dimensions of the plane he's lying flat on is his space. To him, it's the rest of the universe that's gone a little weird, but he himself is perfectly normal. However, once he reorients himself, it is clear that the rest of the universe has moved on without him. This is clearer if we add a second 2D person. Initially, both of our individuals do not move in space. All of their vector is pointing in the direction of time. Nothing that strange seems to happen so far. However, if our stick man on the right turns and vectors at near the speed of light for a bit, then reorients himself, while the second 2D man on the left just stays where he is, it becomes clear that our 2D men have not moved at the same rate through time. Assuming that our two stick men can somehow still see each other, let's imagine that they somehow project an image of themselves onto the other person's space plane. They immediately notice that there is a difference in age. The one who traveled at the speed of light did not advance so quickly through time as the other, who remained stationary and so is younger. But why do we find this model so compelling? Well, it is because of what those projections would look like during changes in direction. From the point of view of the first stick man, initially the projection of their friend seems fairly normal. However, as they start traveling very quickly in space, and their vector oriented in a direction away from time, a 2D shape reveals its inherent flatness. And from a face-on perspective, it goes from this to this. The speedily traveling stickman appears to flatten, with an effect that's more pronounced the faster they go, and the flattening takes place in the direction of their travel. The stickman who remains stationary might wonder at the strange change that is occurring to their friend, never comprehending that it represents a reorientation of a 2D figure in 3D space. Now, what captures my imagination about this is that this same thing happens in real life. According to Einstein's theories of relativity, objects traveling at great speeds in 3D space would appear from an external observer to flatten in the direction of their travel. This squishing effect happens exactly in line with this model, and is to do with time dilation. However, from the person who's traveling's perspective, they do not flatten, but it is the rest of the universe that warps. From their perspective, everything would stretch at the edges of their vision, while their destination would seem further away, which is again what this model would predict. The only difference is that in this model we're just exploring a 2D object stretching, so the stretch is only in one direction, while in real life it's 3D, which means it stretches in two directions instead. But that is what you might expect as you turn away from our conventional 3 dimensions and start orienting yourself away from time. But if this is correct, so what? Why does it matter? If time is truly a direction, then it deepens our understanding of the universe. It also raises more questions. What is the force that pushes us ever forward in time? why does it seem that we can never move against it? Although in this model there is no reason why a vector could not point downwards, in real life that doesn't seem to ever happen. This model also answers the question of, if time is a direction, what is our shape in time? Does part of us protrude into the past or into the future? According to this model, that does not happen. We are flat pancakes in the fourth dimension, pennies that look round when you look at us head on, but revealing our thinness when we turn away from you. That's a strange thought, but it may just be true. This might explain why we are unable to see through time. We just don't extend enough in that direction for it to be visible. Your form might be quite different than you first thought.
This mind-boggling effect is known as time dilation, and it's the universe's way of showing just how closely space and time are tied together. The faster you move through space, the more time stretches and bends. It's like cosmic taffy. So if you've ever watched Back to the Future and thought, hey, time travel sounds really cool, you might have wondered about the problem that comes with it, like the classic grandfather paradox, which sounds more like a family drama than a time travel issue, and that's just what Marty McFly encountered in the first Back to the Future movie.
It's an absolute dream.
He had inadvertently prevented his parents from falling in love, therefore getting married and therefore having kids, and so his very existence was being erased. Because if we think of time as linear, as we experience it, it creates these paradoxes. If your parents never had kids, then you wouldn't have been born. But if you were never born, who went back in time to stop your parents from meeting in the first place? A total mind bender. A loop where cause and effect gets tangled up like the worst set of holiday lights ever. No matter how you twist it, you're stuck in this contradiction. You can't exist to go back in time, but you have to exist to create the paradox in the first place. It's like saying, which came first, the chicken or the time machine? We so often fall into the trap of thinking how we see things is exactly as they are. But then we experiment and we research, and many times we're surprised to learn something completely unexpected. Like all good mysteries, especially in science, nature has an unexpected way of resolving such quandaries. But usually it also means some uncomfortable side effects. And understanding the block universe clears up some of these paradoxical headaches, but it also introduces some potential uncomfortable side effects. And now, for the mind bender of the day, what if I told you that the past, the present, and the future are all equally real, and they're happening right now? You might think I've gone off the deep end, and fair enough. But remember, there was a time when humans thought that the sun revolved around the earth because, hey, it sure looked that way. Then Galileo shook things up, and with better telescopes, we proved the earth isn't the center of the universe after all. Now we can take it as a given. So let's break down the block universe theory.
Think of space-time as a loaf of bread. Einstein realized that just as there are different ways to cut a loaf of bread into individual slices, there are different ways to cut space-time into individual now slices. That is, because motion affects the passage of time, someone who's moving will have a different conception of what's happening right now. And so they'll cut the loaf into different now slices. Their slices will be at a different angle.
That person who's moving will tilt the knife, will be carving out these slices at a different angle. They won't be parallel to my slices of time.
To get a feel for the bizarre effect this can have, imagine an alien here in a galaxy 10 billion light years from Earth, and way over there on Earth, the guy at the gas station. Now, if the two are sitting still, not moving in relation to one another, their clocks tick off time at the same rate, and so they share the same now slices, which cut straight across the loaf. But watch what happens if the alien hops on his bike and rides directly away from Earth. Since motion slows the passage of time, their clocks will no longer tick off time at the same rate. And And if their clocks no longer agree, their now slices will no longer agree either. The alien's now slice cuts through the loaf differently. It's angled toward the past. Since the alien is biking at a leisurely pace, his slice is angled to the past by only a minuscule amount. But across such a vast distance, that tiny angle results in a huge difference in time. So, what the alien would find on his angled now slice, what he considers as happening right now on Earth, no longer includes our friend at the gas station, or even 40 years earlier when our friend was a baby. Amazingly, the alien's now slice has swept back through 200 years of Earth history and now includes events that we consider part of the distant past, like Beethoven finishing the Fifth Symphony.
Even at a relatively slow speed, we can have actually tremendous disagreements on our labeling of now, what happens at the same time, if we're spread out far enough in space.
And if that's not strange enough, the direction you move makes a difference too. Watch what happens when the alien turns around and bikes toward Earth. The alien's new now slice is angled toward the future. And so it includes events that won't happen on Earth for 200 years. Perhaps our friend's great-great-great-granddaughter teleporting from Paris to New York. Once we know that your now can be what I consider the past, or your now can be what I consider the future, and your now is every bit as valid as my now, then we learn that the past must be real. The future must be real. They could be your now. That means past, present, future, all equally real. They all exist.
If you believe the laws of physics, there's just as much reality to the future and the past as there is to the present moment.
The past is not gone, and the future isn't non-existent. Past, the future, and the present are all existing in exactly the same way.
Just as we think of all of space as being out there, we should think of all of time as being out there too. Everything that has ever happened or will happen, it all exists.
It's almost impossible to wrap your mind around. The block universe shows that past, present, and future are all real, whether we can access them or not. So while we're stuck moving in a straight line through time, the whole cosmic timeline is already laid out. So let's consider the photon, which is an individual unit of light. Imagine you're out stargazing on a clear night. You look up and study the light being emitted from a distant star in the Orion galaxy. Let's use Betelgeuse, since there's a sequel to Beetlejuice coming out this year.
Ew, who's Beetlejuice?
You may or may not have realized there's a star with that name, just spelled a bit different. So I will refrain from saying it one more time.
If you say his name 3 times, he will appear. Beetlejuice.
The juice is loose.
Now the light you see from that star is not as it is now, but as it was way back in the past, 429 years to be exact, due to the speed of light. So Betelgeuse is 429 light years away from Earth. However, if we were able to experience reality as a photon, the second that it was birthed in the star from whence it came, it is instantaneously arriving at your eyeball. For a photon, time is irrelevant. It sort of exists outside of time. This is hard to wrap your mind around, but it also highlights another strange but beautiful feature of the world in which we live. Time is relative to the observer. Rather than you being pushed along the river of time in a regular and sequential manner as it seems, you're actually more like the riverbed, and time is moving through you. In a sense, we've arrived back at the days before Galileo, just for different reasons. Perhaps you are the center of the universe.
One million years ago, our ancestors control fire.
Around its warmth and safety, they become social. They cooperate to survive.
They begin to cook and gain more energy from food. Over thousands of generations, their brains grow. They become we.
We make tools, rituals.
As Earth warms, we migrate.
We make art, music, culture.
We domesticate animals, then plants.
We create cities,
Kingdoms,
empires,
the wheel,
writing,
math,
monuments,
religion,
conquest,
nations,
revolution, democracy,
modern science,
medicine,
economy,
trade,
industry,
transport,
electricity,
communication,
technology,
and
at last, today.